Welcome to No Apologies. I'm Dana Lash. One of the consequences of an administration being held hostage to ideology is ideology being socialism, communism, is that everything becomes about advancing that ideology. So here's an excellent example. You have Pete Buttigieg, who is now he's the Secretary of Transportation, former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, and there was absolutely no good reason at all whatsoever why anyone would choose Pete Buttigieg to be Secretary of Transportation. I mean, he's been on a highway and he drives a car. I guess those are his qualifications. And especially when you consider that just 3 years ago, the only people who had ever heard of Buttigieg were the residents of South Bend, Indiana. 103,000 people where he was mayor. Now we only know about him because he was just this very well-to-do, fastidious little Lord Fauntleroy looking kind of Boy Scout mayor who he is with a man named Chasten Buttigieg. Now, clearly, elite progressives were enamored with the idea of putting out identity politics as opposed to any kind of merit or accomplishment. So they were positioning him as the potential first gay U.S. president because the left is obsessed with woke identity politics because they've learned they can merchandise it and they could weaponize it. So in any case, you had candidate Buttigieg, who started out hot at one point. He was actually only out fundraised in the beginning by Bernie Sanders, and he was the third most popular candidate in April of 2019. But by June of that same year, the bloom was off the rose because he was polling fifth in the race for president, and he had actually, I think, none. I don't know if you can be in the red in terms of black support, but I think he was. So ended the dreams of Pete and Chasten as the first gay couple in the White House. So that's why we all know Pete Buttigieg. So, well, Democrats again, now we're talking about it because they're obsessed with identity politics. They were not done with Mayor Pete. Their ideology demands that diversity be placed above diversity of everything except thought, I should add. But that should be placed above merit or competency. So the administration set out to create the most diverse presidential cabinet ever, and it actually ended up with just a lot of their friends. So this is how we ended up with Buttigieg as the Secretary of Transportation, despite the fact that he clearly has no idea about transportation. Now the mayor, former mayor, or now secretary, I guess, to be clear, he has zero experience with any kind of transportation logistics on a large scale. South Bend has a bus station. They have a fleet of about 60 buses. They have a small train station, a tiny little municipal airport. I have no idea based on this why he was chosen to lead a department that has 58,000 employees and a budget of $87 billion. You can figure out why. But the Biden administration, they liked Buttigieg, not just because he was gay, but because he was gay. Also because they knew that Buttigieg wouldn't spend any time doing his actual job or getting in the way. You know, I mean, he's the secretary of a completely irrelevant department and all. About bridges and roads and ports. Remember, they told us all of these desperately needed improvement and investment. So we thought that Buttigieg was going to spend his time on those issues that Democrats cared about, even if you don't. Things like the climate change global warming initiatives or spending billions of dollars on electric car charging stations in rural areas that don't need or want electric car charging stations. And all this while ignoring the ever-increasing price of a gallon of gas. And the higher the price goes, the better to Buttigieg and the Build Back crappier Democrats. So that way you'll stop driving that giant gas-guzzling truck and buy EVs and just outsource not just power and your money, but all the pollution to China. So another thing that Buttigieg is really concerned about that has zero to do with transportation, but he's spending tons of time talking about it, and that is paid paternity leave. So in the middle of the supply chain crisis, quite literally, what Pete Buttigieg was hired to help ensure doesn't happen, Buttigieg is instead focused on paternity leave. After all, he has to help with the new baby.
As you might imagine, we're bottle feeding and doing it at all hours of the day and night. And I'm not going to apologize to Tucker Carlson or anyone else for taking care of my premature newborn infant twins. The work that we are doing is joyful, fulfilling, wonderful work. It's important work. And it's work that every American ought to be able to do when they welcome a new child into their family.
I couldn't hear what he was saying because I was too busy fascinated with why he pokes his head forward every single time he says anything, like to enunciate anything that he says. Have you noticed that? Rewind this and you can actually go back and watch it. And then you will never be able to unsee it because he does this in every single one of his hits. Anyway, Buttigieg has been AWOL during the supply chain crisis, and he's not apologizing for it. He's doing the joyful and fulfilling work with babies. He's talking about his paternity leave that he's been on for like nearly 2 months. What is Pete Buttigieg doing to solve this massive supply chain crisis, though, that's threatening your ability to even get your kids toys for Christmas, or maybe even at some point us antibiotics or anything else? Who knows? Because see, what's really important is that Buttigieg was able to take off 2 months of paternity leave, taxpayer funded, in the middle of this unfolding disaster to recover from having a baby. Now, to be clear, and we have to be incredibly clear these days, since we live in an Amelia Bedelia society where everything is literal and sexuality has become incredibly confusing thanks to science. It's the ideological left, I mean. So to be clear, neither Pete Buttigieg nor Chasten Buttigieg physically passed a baby from their copulatory organs. They adopted their twin children, 2 babies. So what's with the 2-month paternity leave? Because Buttigieg, she didn't have a baby. I mean, I understand bonding, but I also understand that he wanted a federal job that requires attention now. I mean, his body didn't swell up like a water balloon. His hormones didn't spin out of balance. Buttigieg won't be breastfeeding, or wait a minute, I think it's called chest feeding as they refer to it now, chest feeding the baby. And there is a very special bond between mothers and their babies, and it's incredibly important during those first few months after a baby is born, and that bond is unique to mothers and their newborns. But you only believe that if you're not a crazy leftist ideologue who doesn't believe that there are differences between the sexes. And if you're a loony leftist, then Buttigieg is apparently no different than a typical mother, and it's vital that he takes off 2 months of paid paternity leave during a supply chain crisis, taxpayer. So as Buttigieg said, it's important, vital work, more important than solving the supply chain crisis that's threatening the national security of the country. You can be forgiven if it appears that advocating for paid paternity leave for all Americans seems to be like what our transportation secretary is most concerned about. Because indeed, that is what Buttigieg is most concerned about. And how do we know that? It's because paid paternity leave is one of the key issues holding up the entire infrastructure bill in Congress in the first place. So in the middle of a supply chain crisis, they can't get the thing passed because you have 2 Democrats who still have functional brain cells. They won't pass it. And because they resent, along with all 50 Republicans, that this infrastructure bill is being driven first and foremost by ideology and complete ignoring of math. It's packed with all kinds of socialist ideas that have absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with actual infrastructure. Stuff like free universal preschool for everybody, free community college for all students, billions for clean energy programs, and yes, paid paternity leave for all. And these issues, that's what's really important about the infrastructure bill to Democrats. But how do we know that? Because they have the votes to pass an infrastructure bill. If they wanted to do it, they could leave out those items that have nothing to do with infrastructure and debate them separately and pass an actual bill that deals with infrastructure. You know, an infrastructure bill. The Democrats have the votes to do that right now, but they don't do it because they're ideologues and they want socialism and they want give outs and freebies for their friends, and a really $5 trillion infrastructure bill is a way to achieve it. Here's Bret Baier pressing Buttigieg on this very issue. Watch how the Secretary of Transportation and paternity leave advocate Pete Buttigieg responds.
I'm a transportation secretary. I'm also a new father. And I believe that the president's overall vision of making sure that this is a country where it's affordable to raise a family, and making sure that we're supporting Americans with healthcare, and making sure that we deliver on these infrastructure needs, you know, all of these things fit together.
They don't, though. See what he and I mean, you're literally transportation secretary. Talk about transportation. What he and Democrats are ideologues first. They want to transform America into the socialist nanny state. And that's why an infrastructure bill is not just an infrastructure bill. It's a bill to deliver the biggest federal expansion of power in history, packed with things that have nothing to do with real infrastructure. And the proof is Buttigieg spends way more time talking about paternity leave than he ever does about his actual job as Secretary of Transportation. I don't think he's ever been interested in his actual gig, nor does he have any experience doing that job, as the current supply chain crisis clearly demonstrates. And can I also point out that if people don't realize that he hasn't been on the job for 2 months, why do we need a transportation secretary? Hell, why do we need this department at all? Buttigieg is there to be the model, the avatar for diversity in action to promote socialism via the Department of Transportation. which was not created for that reason. I mean, we're supposed to be dealing with transportation infrastructure. That's the whole point of a transportation department. I think it's all redundant. So now Buttigieg is keen on creating another constraint on the supply chain by having the federal government pay everyone to stay home when they have a baby. Actually, it's not the federal government. The federal government's going to be dictating that employers do it. I don't mind if employers want to do it voluntarily on their own dime, but I'm the taxpayer. I'm not paying you to bottle feed your baby 24/7. I'm paying you to deal with all the ships that are out on the West Coast, people who can't even get into these ports and unload their stuff. So you're going to have more people staying home, like Secretary of Transportation during the supply chain crisis, when we need people on the job. And we see Buttigieg making the media rounds, not selling his answer to the supply chain crisis, but instead selling paid paternity leave for all. Watch.
What's really strange is that, this is from a side of the aisle that used to claim the mantle of being pro-family. What we have right now is an administration that's actually pro-family. And I'm blessed to be able to experience that, as an employee, being able to have the flexibility to take care of our newborn children, which is, by the way, work. It's joyful work. It's wonderful work, but it's definitely work. And we as a society, I think, are starting to do a better job of recognizing that parenting is work, that caregiving is work, and supporting it as such, which is, of course, why the president has proposed paid family leave for all Americans, something most Americans already believe that we ought to do, and something that most highly developed countries pretty much take for granted.
So 3 things here really quickly, just kind of off the cuff. It's not a conservative position, number 1, and I'll talk more about that here in a second. Number 2, do dads matter to the left again? Number 3, do families and babies matter to the left again? I feel like they need to pick whatever narrative they have. Look, I've heard this argument 6 ways to Sunday that, we should have the government mandate paid paternity or paid maternity leave or paid family leave or whatever, that it's a conservative position. And if you were really supporting families, this is something that you would support. You can support families and you can also support employers and their free choice to freely determine whether or not they feel that this is best for their bottom line as a way to retain good employees or not. That's also, you can be both of those things at the same time. And I've noticed that a lot of conservatives have taken this approach without paying any heed to this huge nuance here, right? You can support families, but you can also support the federal government not getting involved in telling employers what to do with regards to maternity, paternity, or paid family leave. And I actually think that paid paternity leave, I have a whole post coming up on my newsletter on Substack about this separately from this, where I deep dive into it, but that's not a conservative position. So do not be tied up into thinking that you have to defend a conservative position while also acquiescing and accepting part of their premise as a way to try to get one over on them in this argument, because you're being baited to agree with them, and it conflates a number of issues. It's not a conservative position to support the federal government getting involved and mandating that employers provide paid family leave. Bottom line. And the other thing is, this is a guy who was super thirsty to get this job. He wanted to be on the taxpayer funded TEAT. He wanted that. So when you have a supply chain crisis and when you're a federal employee of this stature, you forego certain little luxuries like staying home for 2 months while accepting a taxpayer funded check so you can bottle feed your kids, okay? We have a lot of issues happening right now around the very thing that you said was close to your heart when you accepted this position in the first place. So you either want the job or you don't. But I'm going to tell you what, we as taxpayers, we don't really have a high level of tolerance for rhetorical flourish on this kind of stuff. Just do your job. Very simple. And by the way, this is what I mean when I said this is what it looks like when a party is captured by ideology. Positions like the Secretary of Transportation, this isn't about hiring someone who actually knows about transportation. It's about hiring someone who shares socialist ideology. Infrastructure bills aren't about infrastructure. They're about advancing the expansion of state power. Paid paternity leave is no longer about working women getting a much needed recovery period away from work to bounce back from their pregnancy and bond with their kids. It's about yet another handout that increases people's dependence on government, offering that special time off even to men, like Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Because if you're a progressive Democrat, every single last thing must serve the ideology. Everything is a chance to enlarge government and shrink the individual. Pete Buttigieg was not chosen because he could fix any kind of transportation issue or deal with infrastructure problems. He was chosen because he was a slick salesman who came from the same brown trousers and loafers factory that John Ossoff and Robert Francis O'Rourke came from. He was chosen because in the new progressive project called America, merit is a thing of the past. Meritocracy, as exemplified in people like Buttigieg, is fine, even preferable, provided it's served up by someone that has the right skin color, gender designation, or sexual orientation. Equity is the hot word now, and that's the goal. That is that's the God that progressive ideologues worship. Democrats and our transportation secretary, Pete Buttigieg, they don't care about solving real problems with the best people and solutions, like we should be doing with this current supply chain crisis. So what we're witnessing is how fast an administration can implode when ideology becomes its master, rather than dealing with reality and doing what is right for the American people. And consequently, this administration is in a nosedive and likely won't survive. The only question now is, will America survive this administration? So coming up, Naomi Schafer Riley is author of a book called No Way to Treat a Child. She joins me to discuss how social justice activists are now corrupting child welfare. Stay with us. Black Rifle Coffee Company is a veteran-owned coffee company serving premium coffee to people who love America, and they develop their explosive roast profiles with the same mission focus that they learned while serving our great nation. And with every purchase you make, Black Rifle Coffee gives back. So in 2020, they donated over 6 million cups of coffee to veteran, law enforcement, and first responder causes. Their high-quality coffee beans are imported all the way from Colombia and Brazil, and then carefully roasted at their facilities in Tennessee and Utah. They even have a signature roast called Lava Panther that was funny the first time I read it. That's directly sourced from a small farm in Guatemala. So although the temperatures are cooling off, don't forget to keep enjoying the great outdoors fueled by Black Rifle Coffee. And the best way to do it is with the Black Rifle Coffee Club. And when you join, your chosen brew is roasted, packaged, and shipped free to your door. And you can also get special discounts and gain access to exclusive products and a lot more. Purchase at blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV and use code DanaTV at checkout for 20% off your purchase and your first coffee club order. It feels like social justice activists have made it a mission to destroy everything that they touch in the name of some kind of progress, although I'm not quite sure how they measure that progress. Now, woke policies have found their way into the foster care and adoption systems. This is insane. And they're impacting the welfare of children, because it seems now that they are giving actually more priority to racial quotas than actually finding children good homes and families to care for them. And so as a result, how many kids are languishing now, not being able to find a forever home, find their adoptive mom and dad, or languishing waiting to get into the foster system? Joining me to discuss this issue, and I can't even believe that this is an issue this was one of the areas that I at least thought would be protected from this, is Naomi Schafer Riley. She's resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, senior fellow at Independent Women's Forum, and author of a new book called No Way to Treat a Child: How the Foster Care System, Family Courts, and Racial Activists Are Wrecking Young Lives. Naomi, thanks for joining me. This is so sad.
Thank you.
This is, I mean, we have some very dear friends of ours who are an adoptive family, and it breaks my heart to think that that family might not have come to be, considering now the way that this seemingly is being approached with adoption and adoptive families. Talk to me about this, and when did this really start becoming a major issue? Because I just would figure that the welfare of children would have taken priority and not racial identity.
Yeah, you would think, but unfortunately our child welfare system now seems to revolve around the needs of adults, not the best interests of children. So the racial element of the system is coming into play in two ways. First of all, you have a movement out there that's called Abolish Foster Care, which is basically sort of grown up along the defund or abolish the police movement. And it's equally dangerous as far as I can tell. They want to abolish the foster care system because of what they see as racial disparities. And they say that, Black kids are investigated more often and they're put into foster care more often than white children. What they do not tell you, though, is that Black children are about twice as likely to suffer from maltreatment in this country. And in fact, they're 3 times as likely to die from child abuse or neglect as their white peers. So Child Protective Services is supposed to obviously protect children regardless of their race. And these folks want us to get out of that business entirely. They even want to do away with mandated reporting, with drug testing for infants. And even they want to reduce police intervention in domestic violence, because often we find out about kids who are in danger when police go and intervene if a woman is being beaten by her husband or boyfriend. The second way that this racial activism influences the foster care system is exactly what you were talking about. There are people out there who think Black kids are better off in foster care, languishing in foster care, unable to find homes, than for them to be cared for by a white family. We are going through this intense period where everybody is focusing on matching skin colors. Even adoption agencies are making white families feel guilty about taking in vulnerable Black children, telling them they have to check their white privilege, and that they're actually harming these kids by taking them away from their true quote unquote culture.
Oh my goodness. And I would think, especially, the true culture is just the culture of family. I know that you had written about Bethany Christian Services and the president of that organization coming out and talking basically to exactly what you were just saying with adoptive families and adoptive services, saying that they needed to place Black children with Black families. And I thought that was a little odd coming from a Christian organization, because they should be kingdom minded and not, ethnically minded first and foremost. Is this is becoming, how prevalent is this within the adoption process and within the system?
So we actually have a law against this in this country. The Multi-Ethnic Placement Act, which was passed in the 1990s by a bipartisan group of congressmen, that said basically, we don't think that it's good for Black kids to languish in foster care. We want to make sure that there is not discrimination going on when it comes to placing children in foster care or placing foster children for adoption. Unfortunately, that law is regularly flouted by our child welfare agencies and by family courts. If you talk to foster families, they hear people talking in court about their skin color. Child welfare workers under their breath are talking about how the race is really not a good match. These are people who won't know how to do a kid's hair. I mean, it's really quite outrageous, because since the Multi-Ethnic Placement Act was passed in the 1990s, tens of thousands more Black children have been able to find safe, loving, and permanent homes, which is, of course, what every child needs.
Every child needs that. And from what I understand, there have been studies done, Naomi, that show that it does not disproportionately affect, or there's no adverse effect at all whatsoever, no negative effect on children who have Black children placed with white families, vice versa. I mean, there's nothing really with skin color that has a negative impact on these kids regarding how they're placed or what family they're placed with, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, adoption is always a traumatic event. It means that something terrible has happened in your life that you need to be adopted. But once you compare Black children who are adopted into white families versus Black children who are adopted into Black families, you see no difference in the outcomes. And so you will get individual people who will say, like, I wish I had been adopted by someone of the same race. But for the most part, people want to be and need to be raised in safe, loving homes. And we need to do that in a timely manner. The foster care system, operates right now on the timelines of adults. So you have family court cases where it could go on for months or years at a time. The average amount of time a kid spends in foster care is 20 months. And for some kids, it's upwards of 3 or 4 or 5 years while we wait around for parents to get their act together. That's an adult timeline. If you say to a 3-year-old, come back and we'll see your case again in 6 months, that's a huge amount of a child's life that is being frittered away, basically, in our bureaucracy.
This is awful. And now this is all becoming part of the bureaucracy, completely unneeded. What does this do to kids, and how many more kids are deprived of being raised in a secure, loving family because we're having to deal with, I guess, this wokeness aspect before their actual well-being?
Sure. Well, there are about 440,000 kids who are in the foster care system now, and about a quarter of them have had their parental rights terminated or are in the process of that happening. But a lot of the kids who are eligible for adoption are kids who are older, kids who are in large sibling groups, or who have such severe mental health or behavioral challenges that it's very hard for them to find an adoptive home. Now, one reason for that is that we allowed them to go back and forth to multiple foster homes, sometimes dozens of foster homes, back and forth to their biological parents while we waited for their biological parents to get their act together. Now, one thing you should understand about the foster care system is that it is really driven by our country's drug crisis. And so many of these biological parents are affected by addiction and mental illness. And, we should feel sorry for them. They have had a very hard life, and we should give them many, many chances to kick their addiction. The question is, how long should we make children wait for them to do that? And we know, just based on, neuroscience, how important it is, especially for young children, to be able to form that secure attachment to an adult, to know that they can depend on an adult to meet their physical and psychological and emotional needs. And when you tear them in and out of homes for the first few years of their lives, you're destroying those possibilities for them.
Yeah, it's so heartbreaking because I know that we have kids that, I mean, there are a lot of kids that just age out of the system that never find that home, that don't have that family and that secure attachment. And it's just heartbreaking to see that now this problem is compounded by this. And one last quick question for you, Naomi. I mean, we have a law against this, but yet we have people that are openly essentially flouting what this law states. I mean, where's the accountability?
There is no accountability, and I think that our legislators really need to start asking some very difficult questions about what is going on in child welfare agencies and family courts. You know, more than one foster family has told me they feel like family court is like a kangaroo court. They have no idea what the laws are that actually apply. They're told that they can't even speak up, even though foster parents have a right in most states to speak up in court. And they're the people who are obviously seeing the kids most often. So we really need some accountability. We need more people to become involved in the system, involved in foster care, becoming CASAs, court-appointed special advocates to represent the best interests of the children. We need more middle-class, responsible Americans to be watching the system because it is not doing what it should.
No, not at all. Gosh, this is just such a heartbreaking story. Naomi, thank you so much for bringing a greater awareness to it and for pushing back on it yourself. Thank you. Good to see you. All right, folks, coming up, Linda McMahon from the America First Policy Institute joins me to discuss this House reconciliation bill, how this is going to massively injure small businesses with little notice language inside. Stay with us. The Social Security Administration's computer servers are 45 years old. Computer servers at Health and Human Services are 50. And maybe that's how cyber criminals hack U.S. Census Bureau's computers, where everything about you is stored. The threat of some cyber thief stealing your credit card isn't your biggest risk. Your massive risk is that they can take ownership of your home. It's called home title theft, and the FBI calls it one of the fastest growing crimes. Cyber criminals can simply hack into vulnerable government, bank, or mortgage company servers where copies of your home's title are stored. And they forge your signature, stating that you sold your home to them. And then they can borrow on your home and leave you in debt. You won't know until collection notices show up. Protect your most valuable asset and visit HometitleLock.com. Register your address to see if you could potentially be a victim and use code RADIO for 30 free days of protection. That's HometitleLock.com, promo code RADIO. If you feel like the federal government is making it harder to be a small business owner, you're correct. The House reconciliation bill is the latest thing that is not helping. Lots of stuff in that. We keep finding new things, because they were wanting us to hurry up and pass it before they actually read it and found out what was in it. Linda McMahon is the chair of the board for America First Policy Institute. Now, previously, she served in President Trump's cabinet as administrator of the Small Business Administration. Linda McMahon joins us now via Skype. Linda, good to see you. Thank you for joining us. You're sounding the alarm about this House reconciliation bill. Tell us what other bad stuff is in this that we are not aware of, going to kneecap small businesses.
Well, first of all, let's call it what it is. This is really big government socialism grab power wish list. It's not just the reconciliation bill. I mean, that's what it is. President Biden campaigned on the fact that he wanted to transform America. Well, that's exactly what he wants to do. And he wants to take away the opportunity of small businesses to really grow and experience the American dream. And if this bill is allowed to pass, that's exactly what's going to happen. There's so much in this. Let's look, first of all, at just the taxes. I mean, Biden said that he wouldn't tax incomes, over $400,000. But what's going to happen with small businesses who are those businesses that are passed through, if you will? But also there are about 8 million of the 37 million businesses, small businesses in our country that, pay taxes at the C Corp level. So if their taxes go from 21% to 27, 28%, that's going to be a big impact on these businesses. So we're just in for a lot of surprises, if you will, if this big government socialism bill passes.
I'm ever more grateful for people like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema. And I may not agree with them on every issue, but boy, am I glad that they're listening to their constituencies. And it's interesting too, because Manchin, coming from West Virginia, people forget that was a state that went for Trump by double digits. And I think it's hysterical that they think Manchin's going to turn tail and support this, this socialist plan coming from Democrats on this. Not going to happen. And he understands, Linda, that here you have 60% of the new jobs that have been created in this country have come from these small businesses that are going to get hit with all these taxes. You mentioned C Corps. We had a conversation just a couple weeks ago about S Corps and, of course, capital gains taxes. Everything that's in this is just disastrous. And we were just coming out of this lockdown as well and doing so incredibly well because of the policies from the previous administration that Biden seemingly is reversing now. I mean, what is this going to do to any kind of recovery, real recovery?
Well, surely it's going to reverse the recovery. We have such a healthy economy right now coming out of COVID because of the policies that were put in under the administration. Those policies which created, the best jobs for women and for Hispanics and for African Americans. We saw taxes decrease, regulations decreased. So our economy was thriving, and then COVID hit. But we're able to have this recovery coming out because of those policies. Now, if the big government socialism bill passes, we're going to raise taxes. We're going to raise regulations, increase regulations again. And there's a little point in this bill that I wrote an op-ed on, I think it was last week or week before, about unions and small businesses and what it can do to small businesses today. The unions who now want to come in and unionize, will go more after employers than they will employees, because employees can still have their private vote, and employers can have a little muscle put on them because it will cost them more to operate as a non-union. So there's so many hidden parts to this government grab for power, I think, that we just need to pay attention to, because it's going to crush small businesses. It really will.
Yeah, and of course the corporate tax rate, I think they're wanting to raise it to where we'd be the highest corporate tax rate in the world. I can't imagine. I mean, it's so anti-business.
Well, that's right. And if you look at the fact that if you combine what state tax would be and the increases for small businesses, they could be paying as much as 31% of the taxes, and it's just out of the question for these small businesses. It literally can put them out of business.
Yes, it definitely would, and they've been the ones who have outlasted at least the lockdown and everything else. That they've made it this long, only to see these regulations come in and these higher taxes from this new administration. Talking with Linda McMahon. Linda, I wanted to ask you too about some of the Joe Biden's remarks where he says that everyone's getting a higher wage, and I'll never forget that one exchange, and I think it was Peter Doocy and Jen Psaki. I think it was Peter Doocy who was asking Jen Psaki this, and she was talking about how the administration had wanted people, even in fast food, to pay like $15 an hour, but because everyone was getting paid to stay home, a lot of these entities had to actually offer way more than the market would actually dictate to support such a job. And Doocy was asking her about this, and she's like, yeah, wages are up, people are making more than ever, but the question then was, well, how does that work with inflation? Because it doesn't matter if you're making more, if you're making a little bit more, inflation's knocking down the value of your dollar, so there really isn't a gain for anyone who says that they might be making more now. Linda, what can you tell us about this?
Well, that's absolutely true. And just look now, I mean, consumers are feeling the pinch already in their pocketbooks. When they go to the gas tank, when they go to buy groceries, they're already seeing the rate of inflation. And this is before this bill even gets passed. I mean, inflation is here today, and I don't think it's transitory. It is here to stay for a while, and it's just going to continue to eat away at our economy. Because small businesses aren't going to be able to support it. Consumers today can't support it because they don't have as much cash in their pocket, if you really look at the fact that prices are up.
Yeah, very much so. Linda McMahon, appreciate what you do. And I tell you, I never actually thought the tweets were mean myself, but I'd take some of those mean tweets any day of the week right now compared to what we're getting from this administration, I tell you. Linda, good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Dana.
Of course. All right, folks, coming up, Biden gets busted violating mask mandates on date night while pushing more mandates for the poors. Will Chamberlain, co-publisher of Human Events and senior counsel for the Internet Accountability Project, joins me next. Stay with us. Thanks to Biden's economic policies, job numbers have been abysmal and inflation is skyrocketing. Instead of following the previous president's pro-business agenda that had the economy booming, Biden wants to tax corporations and pass trillion-dollar bills that we can't pay for. It's time for you to take proactive steps to protect your wealth and your retirement by investing in gold and precious metals, and Legacy Precious Metals can help. Washington keeps printing money to pay for their outrageous bills, but all that does is devalue your dollar. Gold offers you a hedge against inflation. As the dollar gets weaker, gold gets stronger. The folks at Legacy Precious Metals are the gold standard when it comes to investing in precious metals, and they have a team of experts who can counsel you on the best options for you and your family. Don't leave your retirement to chance. Call Legacy Precious Metals at 866-580-2088 or visit them online to download their free investor's guide chock full of useful info at legacypminvestments.com. So the mask is theater, let's be honest. I mean, there's a reason I jokingly call it face painting, because it is. I mean, there's so many studies out there showing just how completely ineffective these masks are at preventing particles that are smaller than the threads actually making the mask that can still filter through it. We're not going to go and relitigate all of that. The latest, though, you have politicians driving this home. Joe Biden, Mayor Lori Lightfoot. Right? Friday was the deadline for the vaccine mandate in Chicago. Lori Lightfoot can't follow her own mask mandate. And then, of course, you saw the thing in D.C. where you had the president and the first lady go to dinner, and they have also a mandate in D.C., and they were walking past all of these people, the help, as it were, at a restaurant that all had their masks on, but not the president nor the first lady. Maybe we could be more like them, right? Will Chamberlain is co-publisher for Human Events and senior counsel for the Internet Accountability Project. He joins me now to discuss. Will, good to see you. At no point, it seems like it's never going to dawn on any of these individuals that keep preaching to us about the virtue and importance of mask wearing, how much it goes against their arguments when you see pictures of Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot during, a mask mandate, not wearing one, or the President of the United States or Jill Biden. I mean, it's crazy to me that we're still having this argument a year on.
Yeah, I mean, I like what Professor Adrian Vermeule said, and I'm not sure he even said it about masks, but he said it about progressive behavior generally, which is that it's not hypocrisy, it's hierarchy. These people genuinely believe, just somewhere in deep, that they have the right to do things that other people aren't in a position to do. Remember when you had all the attendees at the Martha's Vineyard party and the media was saying, well, these are sophisticated people, so they don't have to wear masks even as the waitstaff does. I mean, it's gross. It's also hierarchy, obviously, in the sense that, all these progressive, notables are happy to be seen with servants who are masked and essentially not present. It's the kind of classic, there's something just very, very horribly elitist about it. And, for a party that prides itself on trying to be one that looks out for the common person, they just seem completely oblivious to the fact that they treat people this way.
That's a really good point, because they always talk about inclusivity, but yet it's almost as if they use this to be exclusive. And yes, that editorial that said, I can't remember if it was New York Times or where it was, but yes, it was an interview. It was an interview. I think it was on NPR. Yeah. They were saying, oh yeah, well, this was a sophisticated party because, Will, as you know, if you are a sophisticated progressive, that is an inoculation. That actually does transfer more immunity than the injection, I'm told.
Right. Meanwhile, of course, they lecture those people who have had natural immunity that they're being absolutely foolish for not, taking the vaccine. Like, that's the position I'm in. I'm a person who's pro-vaccine, and if I hadn't had COVID last fall, I would have gotten the vaccine. But I've yet to see, I've seen one small study that suggested that it confers an additional benefit, and then there's like a bigger study that came out of Cleveland that was much more muddled. So I'm gonna wait and see with the data, because I've had contracted the disease before. But yet I'm an unsophisticated person, despite being someone who actually reads the literature and is a somewhat educated layperson. It's a bizarre situation.
It is bizarre. And, I will say, I'm glad, like when I saw the party that former President Obama had at Martha's Vineyard, I was glad to see people out and about and being normal again. And I actually welcomed that. And I know that some of their other progressive, ideologues were saying how horrible it was, and they desperately were running to try to cover because they knew that they were going to get criticism. And I think that we should all be like that and just get back to normal. We should be like the president and the first lady, not have to, but encourage the staff to also not wear the masks. I feel bad because you have people on their feet all day. They're working 8-hour days and they have to wear that face covering.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's almost like the elites and the politicians within the Democrat Party sort of realize that this is all a joke, but yet their voters don't. As a person who just recently planned a wedding, you'd not be surprised by the fact of how paranoid liberals can be about COVID even now. I got requests for people to separate tables between vaccinated and unvaccinated at the wedding.
So wait, I got to stop you. Someone requested that you do that planning your wedding, yes, to segregate the vaccinated with the unvaccinated.
Yeah, they were wondering if we would do that, and when we said, of course, we're not doing that, they said we're not attending. And it's like, we had a number of close family not attend for, because they were scared, who are vaccinated, did not decide not to attend out of the COVID scare.
Because their vaccination only works if you're vaccinated. Like, your seatbelt only works if the other car has a seatbelt. And
it was a completely outdoor wedding too. I mean, it was under a tent. This is not, we were trying to be very reasonable about this. But right. That's it goes to show you that, in fact, there is a segment of kind of, I don't like to be sort of racial about it, but it is really wealthy white liberals who are particularly paranoid about COVID. And you kind of see like what happens if that's the entire left of a country. That's Australia and New Zealand, right? Like that's what happens. Oh, yeah. You get absolutism, complete COVID authoritarianism. I think because actually the Democrat Party in the United States is more diverse, they are unable to go as far as they could in a different country.
Yeah, no, this is going to be very entertaining to have these conversations for the holiday dinners, Thanksgiving and Christmas and everything else. Will Chamberlain, that's a new one. God love you. Planning a wedding in the middle of a waning pandemic and having to deal with that. Congratulations on it too, by the way. Will, thanks for joining us. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, anytime.
All right, folks, more big names are pushing back against vaccine mandates and sacrificing their livelihoods to do so. We got the latest for you after this. So I think it's fair to say you only really know what you believe when those beliefs are tested. And Allison Williams, the host for ESPN, is the latest to be willing to lay down her career in order to state against what she believes is medical tyranny. So in a very tearful statement, Allison Williams very articulately explained why she's declining to get vaccinated at this point as a mother and as someone who she wants to have more children. So here's a bit of her statement from Instagram. Watch.
I have been denied my request for accommodation by ESPN and the Walt Disney Company, and effective next week, I will be separated from the company. In addition to the medical apprehensions regarding my desire to have another child in regards to receiving this injection, I am also so morally and ethically not aligned with this. And I've had to really dig deep and analyze my values and my morals. And ultimately, I need to put them first.
I like what she said about belief and how she'd been thinking about that word. And she said that she had to dig deep and analyze her values and morals in regards to this mandated injection. And when she did that, she realized that Disney's and ESPN's beliefs had changed, but her convictions had not. And she added that as recently as April, Disney's official policy was that it was up to the employee as to whether or not they got vaccinated. And she also allowed for the fact that Disney and ESPN changed their policy and they had the right to. That said, Williams's beliefs did not change, and they no longer aligned with those of ESPN and Disney. So that's where the rubber met the road for Allison Williams, because Williams wasn't for bodily autonomy and medical freedom in words only. I mean, she believed those things very deeply and laid down her career for it. And that's when you know that you truly hold a belief, by the way. Right now, as Americans, we're finding out what each of us really holds dear. And we talk a lot about our freedoms in the United States, freedom of speech, to move, assembly, et cetera, make choices about our bodies. But as people's livelihoods are threatened and as cancel culture destroys reputations, we're finding out who's willing to stand up for their principles and with cable news entities and not just with other broadcast entities that hurt less. Bravo to Allison Williams and Kiri Irving, and Southwestern Pilots and Chicago Police Union and many, many others who've been willing to put their careers and really on the line, their reputations for their convictions. Now, hopefully their examples inspire others to think about their beliefs and what they would be willing to sacrifice. Because if you haven't figured this out, this test is coming for everyone sooner or later. And it's not just the mandated vaccines, it'll soon be about something else, because it's a time of testing. And once it's done, pass or fail, that's when you know that you truly believe. All right, that does it for us tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Good night, don't bend the knee.